You guys have heard me talk about books? Now let's talk about movies. Alright guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Zach with Zacks Books, and welcome back to Zocktober. So, obviously, as you guys know by the name of my channel, Zacks Books, generally I talk about, well, books. In this episode of Zocktober, I wanted to kind of take a dip into the movie category. I wanted to share with you the top 10 movies that I find the scariest, the most horrifying, just my all-time favorite horror genre movies. Does not necessarily mean it's the scariest movie of all time or it's the goriest movie of all time. These horror genre movies are my top 10 favorites to watch that I've seen. Just a list like that. It's not like I'm picking the top 10 scariest movies of all time. That I cannot make a list of. But this is a top 10 list of my favorite movies that are kind of horrific to watch. So make sure you let me know what yours are down below, so maybe I can take a look at them in the future. But otherwise, sit back, relax. I've got 10 movies I'm going to talk about here. And also don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. And let's talk about some films. Alright, these are in no particular order. They're just movies I'm going to talk about here. So the first one I'm going to talk about is The Conjuring. So I was pretty much between this and the second Conjuring movie. I have not seen the third one. I do believe that the first one is the true scariest version. This is about the Perrin family. They just move into this farmhouse and a lot of bad things kind of start happening. Ed and Lorraine Warren, which are casted perfectly in my opinion in all three of these films. Well, two of them I've watched. The third one I haven't seen, but they're cast perfectly for the roles that they're in. Patrick Wilson is also in Insidious, which is another kind of horror film kind of thing. I think he's only in the first one. That's a movie I've seen parts of, so you won't be seeing that on this list. Spoiler alert. But The Conjuring, it's a very creepy movie. I think the first one is the scariest out of the two I've seen, plus Annabelle, and Annabelle Comes Home. I think The Conjuring is the scariest one between those ones. It's a good film. So, there you have the first horror movie on my list, The Conjuring. Alright, the next one I'm going to talk about was kind of a weird surprise movie back in the early 2000s. It's called Saw. So, this sparked 7 sequels. There was a spin-off movie called Spiral, which has got Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson in it, which actually came out, I think, a year or two ago, or maybe this year. I have not seen that one, but I have seen all the other Saw movies up until this point. And I gotta say, the first one is probably the creepiest. The second one, I like that one. I think it's more funny because it's more, you get a group of people and they're all in a house. The house is poisoned and they're all kind of fighting to stay alive, and I don't like the second one more than the first one because the first one is more psychological. It's such a psychological horror thriller movie. It's so good. Basically, what happens is there's two guys trapped in a room, and TV pops on. There's this creepy doll that pretty much says, you've got this much time to live. You got to get out of the room, and the only way you can do it is there's little hidden hints thrown out every now and again to kind of give them clues in the room with how to get out. Ultimately, what they need to end up doing is sawing through their legs so they can get out of the shackles they're in. And it's a really horrific movie. It's very gory. The whole series is very gory. But the first one I just think is the best movie out of all of them. And honestly, obviously you need to watch all of them up until, I don't know how closely related Spiral is to the whole series, but the plot twist at the end of the whole entire franchise in terms of the original ones, not Spiral, is, in my opinion, I liked it. I thought it was phenomenal. A lot of people hated it, but just know you gotta obviously start with the first one and go all the way through. But it's a very good series in total, but I will say the first Saw movie is by far my favorite out of all of them. So there you have my next movie, Saw. Alright, the next horror movie I'm going to talk about is one that I had watched fully for the first time this past year after I had read the book. And that is The Silence of the Lambs. So this movie is another psychological horror thriller, in my opinion. It's one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. It follows this female detective who's trying to catch this serial killer who is basically murdering certain sized women so he can make himself a woman's suit because he doesn't want to be a man anymore. Which that's the gist I got from it. But his name is Buffalo Bill. And pretty much he skins his victims and wants to make a woman's suit. Again, like I said, it's only certain size women. He doesn't like just do it to all of them. It's like a specific size. Like he'll act like a nice guy. And at least in the movie, it goes like, there's a scene where he's like trying to get this couch into a van. He can't do it. He asks this girl, and like he goes, "You go in the back. I'll lift it up into you," and kind of pushes the couch in there with her back there. And he's like, "By the way, what's your size?" And he's like, "I got a niece who's like, who looks about your size." And she says the size. He's like, "Oh, that's what I need." And then pretty much just knocks her out. And yeah. So, it's a really cool movie. The character of Hannibal Lecter, again, is portrayed iconically by the guy who does it. But the character of Hannibal Lecter is a very cool one, very sadistic. He kind of helps out the detective by trying to like narrow down like how a serial killer kind of person would work. And it's very helpful. And I absolutely love... the whole movie is just so good. It's got everything you really want in a movie, in my opinion, in terms of like a horror movie. There's psychological stuff involved. There's some gore involved. It's just such a good movie, and I really felt bad, like, because I had not really fully watched it, and I feel like ever. Like, I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I've never like sat and actually watched the whole thing. So it's really fun actually watching the whole thing. And again, I love the movie. That's why it's on the list. So there you have The Silence of the Lambs. Alright, the next movie I'm going to talk about is probably my favorite, like, I don't really call it like monster movie, but it's, I think, a monster movie. And that's Jaws. I know that I just recently read the book. There are some significant differences between the book and the movie. I like the movie version a little bit better. It's a phenomenal movie. It's about, obviously, Jaws. It's a killer shark on the loose in this town in Amityville, Maine, I think it was where it is. It's Amityville somewhere. It's somewhere, and the town is called Amityville. I don't remember the state it's in, though. I'm sorry. But it's a very phenomenal movie. The character of Quint is, I mean, probably one of my favorite movie characters of all time. Like, he's up there with, like, Jack Torrance, and he's such like a funny character. He's so cool. He's got so many, like, smart aleck lines and so many funny lines he says. It's really funny. Obviously, the book plays out a little different than the movie does, and I actually really prefer the movie version of this versus the book version just because of the differences and because of what I've seen in the movie. I saw it before, obviously, reading the book. And I just thought they didn't do Quint that much justice in the book, and I feel like they didn't do Mr. Hooper that much justice in the book either. They kind of made him like this guy who's cheating on Brody's wife and made it a whole entire story thing in the book. While in the movie, they just become friends, and it's like really cool, and I like prefer that versus what happens in the book. So there you have what I'll consider like my monster pick for the horror genre, and that is Jaws. Alright, the next movie I'm going to talk about is The Thing. Not the most recent version that came out, I think, in 2011, but the one with Kurt Russell in the 80s? I think it was in the 80s when that movie got released. 80s or 90s. It was a while ago. It's based off of the short story Who Goes There, and that is a book that I read, and I thought it was a really good short story. The movie is phenomenal. It's so good. The effects for the time it was in were actually really good and really cool, and the character that Kurt Russell plays is just phenomenal. I love the movie. It's so creepy too. If If you don't know what it's about, it's pretty much about a group of U.S. scientists that kind of go up. I think they're in the Arctic or they're in Russia. They're in somewhere where there's a lot of snow and it's like isolated from like any civilization for hundreds of miles. And what pretty much happens is the movie begins where there's this helicopter chasing this husky in the snow. It comes across this camp area where the U.S. people are at, and ultimately the helicopter ends up blowing up. Something in there makes a mistake. It blows up, and they speak a different language too, and so they can't like communicate with the U.S. people because none of them really know the other language that well, and so there's no communication. Pretty much what they're saying is they're warning them that the husky is not a husky, it is a creature. And what ends up happening is the creature pretty much takes the form of a human being and can duplicate it perfectly. That's pretty much what happens in the book and in the movie, and all hell breaks loose. Like, everything bad that could happen pretty much happens, and the ending, I think, is one of the biggest cliffhangers in movie history, and I absolutely love it, and it's just a really good movie, and I wish there would be some sort of like sequel made to where you can kind of figure out the actual true ending for how it goes and how it plays out. Like, who is the thing at the end? Like, is it still alive? Like, that's just what I want to know. And I know there was like a loose made video game back in the day that kind of would play it off as a sequel, and not a lot of people liked it. So I don't know. I would just hope that there is some kind of movie that gets made that's kind of like a sequel to it, because I know the earlier one, the one 2011, was like a prequel. But I would much rather see a sequel to it. But The Thing, one of my all-time favorite horror movies. My dad wouldn't even let me watch it when I was younger. So there you have The Thing. All right, the next movie I'm going to talk about is, honestly, I think the scariest movie that I actually have on this list that actually freaked me out the most. It's kind of a tie between this and one of the other ones that I still haven't talked about yet, but Sinister is one of the creepiest movies I've ever seen. Ideally what happens is Ethan Hawke plays this writer who buys this house that has had a very bad history to it. There have been murders in the house, all sorts of them. And he doesn't tell his wife this because she doesn't like him being the kind of writer he is, where he writes about haunted houses, and so he wants to live in one. He doesn't tell her that. They move into the house. This evil demonic creature ends up becoming a big issue for him. He goes up in the attic and he finds a box full of like home videos. Well, they're kind of home videos, and then they take super, super dark turns. Pretty much what this creature does is it kind of makes the children in the family, like, it usually triggers just one of the kids. It's usually the younger one, to do very horrific things. And there's some horrific imagery in a lot of the clips that they play back in, and it's just a really scary movie. The creature itself is also really terrifying. It's got like no lips, it's got a gray face, black eyes. It's really creepy looking. And this movie is like one of the only things that actually is like really freaked me out. So, and that was isn't like a younger adult, not like when I was a kid. Like, this was like, it got me. So there you have Sinister. All right, the next movie we're going to talk about is the Blair Witch Project. There's been a sequel. There's like this weird remake that happened in the past couple years that not a lot of people really talked about, but I'm talking about the original one that came out in the 90s. I think it was late 90s, early 2000s. Very creepy movie. What pretty much happens is three friends go into the woods to investigate the Blair Witch, which is this creature out in the woods that pretty much kills you. And there's a lot of the townsfolk where they go like know about it, but they don't like ever really do anything about it. They don't really care. Like, they just try and ignore it because they know what it can do. Three friends, being dumb idiot college kids, don't care. They go out and investigate it anyway. All hell breaks loose. Bad things only happen, and the ending, probably one of the best endings ever, because there's a story that's told earlier in the movie about another kind of killer. Pretty much how the movie ends, it plays a big part. That story, pay attention to that story when they're talking about another killer. When they mention like putting kids in a corner, pay attention, because when you get to the end of the movie, it comes back. It comes around full circle. It's a very scary movie, in my opinion. Without, like, ever seeing, like, the creature itself. Like, it's a very creepy movie. It's not like a normal, like, movie. It's like a found footage. Kind of like how Paranormal Activity was, but I think the Blair Witch Project is a lot scarier than the Paranormal Activity franchise is. So that's why that's not on the list, but you have the Blair Witch Project. So there you have the Blair Witch Project. Alright, we're down to the last 3 movies, and if you guys have been watching so far, which hopefully you have, probably wondering, where's Stephen King? Well, I wanted to make the list kind of more on the fair side, so I only picked 1 King movie. Although Pet Sematary, the original one, is probably an honorable mention, the one I need to pick is obviously my all-time favorite, The Shining. So, I talk about this movie all the time, I talk about this book all the time, it's my all-time favorite movie of all time. Pretty much what happens, Jack Nicholson plays Jack Torrance, and probably, besides One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in my opinion, is probably one of the best roles he's ever played. He takes on the role of Jack Torrance. He takes on the role of being the winter caretaker for the Overlook Hotel. He's a recovering alcoholic who stopped drinking because he hurt his son, which Danny Torrance, which is his son, has got a special ability called the Shine, or the Shining. The Overlook Hotel's got a very troubled past, very bad past. They go over there for the winter. A lot of bad things happen. Cabin fever ensues. Again, I talk about this all the time, so I'm going to keep this as brief as possible. So, pretty much a vague synopsis of the movie. It's my all-time favorite movie. I can sit here and watch it all day. I actually had a road trip when my older brother was in college where I actually just almost like fell asleep but just sat and like watched the movie in my head. Like, that's just how well I know this movie. As I started watching it back in early 2000s at my great-grandmother's house up in Wisconsin on a VHS tape. So I would play it, rewind it pretty much every day when I was up there. So I know this movie very well, and it's my all-time favorite horror movie and my all-time favorite Stephen King movie. So there you have The Shining. Alright, the next one I'm going to talk about, it's not necessarily like a horror film, but it's a film that kind of gave me some chills and some creeps back when I was younger and I first watched it. A lot of people actually don't like this movie, and I'm in the category of absolutely flipping loves this movie, and that is Signs. It's the movie starring Mel Gibson, Joaquin Phoenix, and pretty much you're on a farm, and aliens pretty much attack their farm. There's signs in cornfields all over the United States. It's a whole like world invasion. They have to like protect themselves. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's such a good film. It's my all-time favorite M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's just a really good movie. It's creepy. It's eerie. I don't know. To me, it's just a good movie. I just don't know what else I could say. It's just a really good movie. So there you have Signs. All right. The last movie I'm going to talk about is... Okay, so my dad introduced me to a lot of horror movies when I was younger, and none of them were like he watched them, but none of them were like the traditional, like, black and white, like Dracula, Wolfman, The Invisible Man, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, like any of those kind of movies. The movie that I saved for last is probably one of my all-time horror, gory movies ever, and that is The Evil Dead. Yes, I'm talking about the movie with Bruce Campbell back in the late, or the early 90s, the middle of the 80s. I don't remember when it was. The graphics were horrendous, obviously, compared to what we have now. But back then, it was iconic. It's one of the scariest movies of all time. Pretty much what happens is a group of college friends go up to this cabin out in the woods, and demonic creatures are out there. What happens is the woods are pretty much possessed after the Necronomicon, which is like the Book of the Dead. They discover it in the basement, in the cellar, and they play a tape, and pretty much like there's 2 guys, 3 girls, and what happens is the voice on the recorder is from the scientist who's doing like workout in the woods at the time, and pretty much says like, this, I'm about to say the words of the dead. Once this happens, like, the dead will rise and crap like that. And he says it. The woods become possessed by an evil entity, and there's a pretty graphic scene in this movie where one of the girls gets, like, raped by a tree. So I'm just giving you that forewarning now. It happens relatively about a quarter to a third of the way into the movie, and it's pretty graphic. So just giving you that heads up. But, I mean, it's not like the rest of the movie isn't gory or creepy, but it's very weird, and that scene has stuck with me because of how weird it is. But it's a very good movie, and it sparked a trilogy where there's Evil Dead 2, which is another, like, gory, creepy movie, but there's more comedic relief in there, so that's why it's not on this list. And then there's Army of Darkness, which is literally just, like, a comedic horror movie. Kind of goes in order. Like, the first one's absolutely creepy as hell, the second one's kind of like a mixture, and then the third one's just, like, comedy with, like, a scare once in a while. So, The Evil Dead, probably one of my all-time favorite horror movies. It's so good. So, there you have The Evil Dead. Alright guys, so those are my top 10 favorite horror, mystery, thriller, suspense type movies, mainly horror related. Again, they're not movies that necessarily scare the crap out of me, but they're just movies that are of, like, the horror-ish mystery genre that really are good movies in my opinion. So, what are some of your favorites? Make sure you let me know in the comments down below. And again, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next video. Later.